husband left his wife for his mistress, and instead of arguing, the wife let him go with alarming calm. The mistress thought she had won, but years later, the secret she discovered left her in shock. The truth didn't hit with a bang, but with the soft rustle of paper beneath her fingers. There stood Diana in the middle of the home office they'd once set up together in their Seattle suburban house, the familiar scent of coffee and cedar mingling with a chill that crept up her spine. It was a dull Tuesday afternoon, the kind where time drags, and she was searching for an old document, a car insurance policy that needed renewing. On impulse, almost mechanically, she opened the bottom drawer of Joe's desk, the one he kept as his personal archive. And there, among folders of tax returns and investment guides, her eyes landed on an envelope from a credit card they didn't use for household expenses. Curiosity, sharp and unsettling, urged her to pull out the statement. Her heart began to pound, a dull thud against her ribs as she scanned the lines. Expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never visited, purchases at a boutique selling lingerie that wasn't her style, a piece of jewelry bought 2 months ago that she'd never seen. Each entry was a small stab, a nail in the coffin of her trust. But the final blow, the one that stole her breath, was at the bottom of the stack. A crumpled receipt for a utility bill, forgotten with an address across town in Capitol Hill. An apartment she didn't know existed, a secret nest funded with money meant for their family. She could have screamed. She could have torn those papers into 1,000 pieces, scattering the evidence of betrayal across the floor, just as her marriage had shattered inside her. She could have called her friends, her sister, sobbing through the pain. But Diana did none of that. With an almost robotic precision, she took her phone and photographed each document, each receipt, each proof of his double life. She saved the images, not as weapons for a future war, but as a quiet reminder of the decision she made in that moment. She wouldn't be the victim. She refused the role of the unhinged wife, the pitiful woman who lost her husband to another. The script life handed her was too predictable, and she wouldn't play it. When Joe came home that evening, he found her in the living room, seated in the leather armchair he'd gifted her for her last birthday. A glass of Pinot Noir sat untouched on the side table. He walked in smiling, the day's exhaustion etched on his face, and leaned to kiss her. Diana turned her head slightly, a gesture so subtle he barely noticed. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clear, free of the quiver of hurt or the weight of tears. Joe's brow furrowed, his ease fading. He knew her better than anyone. He knew Diana's silence was more dangerous than any storm. He sat on the couch across from her, the distance between them suddenly feeling like a chasm. "Is something wrong with the kids?" he asked, a father's first worry. "No, they're fine," she replied, her deep hazel eyes meeting his. There was no accusation in her gaze, just a disarming clarity. "It's about us, Joe. Or rather, about you." A shiver ran down his spine. The air grew thick, heavy. He rehearsed a denial, prepared to weave the web of excuses he'd been practicing in his mind for months. But before he could speak, she continued. "I know, you don't need to tell me how or how long. The details don't matter anymore." She paused, wetting her lips. "I'm not going to fight, Joe. I won't make a scene. I won't humiliate you, and I won't beg you to stay. If it's freedom you want, then you're a free man." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd expected anything but this. He'd braced for a confrontation, broken dishes, a night of accusations and tears. He was ready to defend himself, to minimize, maybe even to beg for forgiveness he didn't feel. But this calm, this unconditional surrender of the freedom he craved, disarmed him completely. It was as if she'd flipped the game board, and he who thought himself the king was suddenly a confused pawn. "Diana, he started, his voice faltering. "No," she cut him off, with a firmness he rarely saw. "Don't say anything, don't ruin this moment with lies. Just accept it. You won. You can go." He stared at her, stunned. Won. This didn't feel like a victory. It felt like surrender, but not his. She was setting the terms, even in defeat. There was something in her posture, an unshakable dignity that made him feel small, inadequate. While he'd prepared for the fight of his life, she simply refused to engage, and that refusal was, somehow, more terrifying than any rage. That night, as he packed a suitcase with trembling hands, feeling like a stranger in his own home, a question began to form in his mind, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of his guilt. Why was she so calm? Why was there no pain in her eyes, only a cold, terrifying resolve? He walked out the front door believing he was stepping toward happiness and a new beginning, but an uneasy feeling followed him. He didn't yet know, but the freedom Diana had granted so easily wasn't a gift. It was a sentence, and he'd spend the rest of his days trying to understand why the calm of that wounded woman felt like the prelude to his own ruin. The next morning, while Joe woke up in another bed, feeling a strange mix of euphoria and an unnamed emptiness, Diana was making breakfast for their children. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen, a scent of normalcy that clashed violently with the chaos that had settled into their lives. She sat them down at the table, Ethan, 14, with the suspicion typical of adolescence, and Sophie, 10, whose eyes still saw the world with an innocence Diana would do anything to protect. With the same calm, steady voice from the night before, she told them. She didn't use the word betrayal or paint their father as a villain. She simply said that she and Joe were no longer a couple, that he'd moved out, but his love for them remained unchanged. "Your dad will always be your dad," she said, looking into each of their eyes, "and I expect you to keep loving and respecting him. Adult problems are for adults. This doesn't change our love for you." Ethan, shocked, shut down, anger and confusion simmering beneath the surface. Sophie cried softly. Diana hugged them both one at a time, feeling their pain as if it were her own. But she didn't waver. Her strength was the anchor they needed, and she wouldn't let herself sink. Meanwhile, in an apartment across town, Joe was telling Emily how it had all happened. "It was easier than I thought," he said, opening a bottle of wine to celebrate. "No fights, no yelling. She just gave me my freedom." Emily, a vibrant woman full of life, smiled, relieved. She'd imagined Diana as a shrew, a bitter woman who'd make their lives hell. The news of a peaceful split was the victory she'd hoped for. They toasted, celebrated with a night of passionate love, believing the biggest hurdle was behind them and only happiness lay ahead. Little did they know that the real obstacle wasn't the war they'd expected, but the peace they couldn't comprehend. Weeks passed. A new, strange normalcy began to settle in. On a sunny Saturday, Diana decided to go to Pike Place Market. She needed to buy a birthday gift for a friend, and more than that, needed to feel the world moving outside. As she wandered through the bustling food court, her heart stopped for a moment. There, a few yards away, were her children, and with them was Emily. Joe was nowhere in sight. Emily was laughing at something Ethan said, trying to fix Sophie's hair. A domestic scene, almost natural, that made Diana's stomach churn. She took a deep breath, taming the wave of emotions threatening to spill over. She didn't feel anger. She wouldn't make a scene. With steady steps, she approached. "Mom!" Sophie shouted, running into her arms. Ethan followed, relief clear on his face. Emily froze. Her smile died, and the color drained from her face. She braced for the inevitable confrontation. She expected accusations, a public scene, the hatred she felt she deserved. She watched Diana hug her children, talk to them briefly, and then, to her utter shock, saw her walk toward her. Diana stopped at a respectful distance. Her eyes held no fury, just a calm, direct assessment. "Emily," she said, the name sounding oddly natural without venom. "I'm not here to ruin your outing. I just have one request." Emily nodded, unable to form words. Her heart pounded wildly. "If you're going to be with him, and by extension, with my kids," Diana continued, her voice low but carrying an undeniable authority, "treat them with respect. They're children going through something tough. Don't force them to accept you, don't try to buy their affection, and don't speak ill of me in their presence, just as I won't speak ill of their father or you. Give them time. That's all I ask." With that, Diana kissed each of her children on the forehead, said she'd see them the next day, and turned, walking away with the same poised, unshakable grace as always. Emily stood rooted, stunned. The speech she'd prepared to defend herself, the justifications, the possible sharp retorts, all dissolved into the air. She'd expected an enemy, a woman broken by hatred, and instead found a dignity that disarmed and, in a way, humiliated her. That calm was more devastating than any insult. It wasn't the calm of someone who'd lost, but of someone in control of a situation no one else could see. As she watched Diana walk away, a terrifying question began to echo in Emily's mind, the same one haunting Joe. Why didn't she fight? That serenity couldn't be natural. Did it hide a pain so deep it had become dangerous? Or worse, did it conceal a plan, a secret that turned them all into pawns in her silent game? In that moment, watching Diana's children, Emily felt for the first time that, though she'd won the man, she might have lost a war she didn't even know she was fighting. Emily got home that Saturday with her heart racing, Diana's composure echoing in her mind like a disturbing mantra. When Joe walked through the door after dropping the kids at their grandparents', she spilled everything, recounting every detail of the encounter at the market. The way Diana approached, the lack of hatred in her eyes, the words delivered with unyielding firmness. "She asked me to respect her kids," Emily said, pacing the living room of their new apartment. That's it. No yelling, no accusations, she was dignified. It's terrifying, Joe. Joe, trying to unwind on the couch, felt the same chill that had haunted him since the night he left. "I told you, she's different. She's not the Diana I knew." "Different how?" "Nobody reacts like that to betrayal," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's not normal. She's planning something, I'm sure of it. The meeting with the lawyers is on Monday. That's when she'll strike. She's playing us, making us let our guard down so she can destroy us in court." Emily's theory, born of fear, made sense to Joe. It was the only logical explanation. The Diana he'd known for 20 years was passionate, intense. This calm was a facade, a war strategy. He clung to the idea as it was easier to face a cunning enemy than the ghost of a woman he could no longer decipher. They spent the rest of the weekend in a state of contained anxiety, preparing for the legal battle they were sure was coming. They reviewed documents, talked to their lawyer about worst-case scenarios, armed themselves for a war over assets, pride, everything. Monday arrived grey and drizzly, mirroring the mood in the law firm's conference room. The air was thick with formality and tension. Joe and his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a predatory smile, sat on one side of the polished mahogany table. Across from them was Diana, accompanied by a lawyer whose calm demeanor almost matched her client's. Emily wasn't there, but her anxiety was almost tangible, as if she were waiting outside. Joe's lawyer began, his voice authoritative, talking about the complexity of dividing assets, the businesses they'd built together, the investments. He was ready for a long, bloody negotiation. Then Diana's lawyer interrupted politely. "With all due respect, I think we can simplify this." She turned to her client. "Diana?" Diana, who'd been observing the scene with unnerving calm, adjusted herself in her chair. Her eyes met Joe's, and for a brief moment he saw a flicker of something he couldn't place. Not pain, not anger. It was farewell. "I don't want a war, Joe," she said, her voice clear, filling the room's silence. "I'm not going to fight for half the businesses or the investments. You built those, the credit's yours. You can keep it all." A stunned silence settled over the room. Joe's lawyer blinked, incredulous, looking from his client to Diana, as if he'd misheard. Joe himself felt his mouth go dry. "What I want," Diana continued, "is what's essential for our kids' stability. I want the house. It's their home, the only one they've known. I don't want them to lose that too. And of course custody, with a flexible visitation schedule for you. I want you to be as present in their lives as you've always been, and a fair child support payment based on their current standard of living, nothing more." She finished and leaned back, as if she'd just ordered coffee. The generosity of the proposal was so absurd, so far from the norm of contentious divorces, it felt like a trap. Joe's lawyer, recovering from the shock, eyed her suspiciously. "Mrs. Diana, this is an extremely generous proposal," he said carefully. "Are you certain? You're giving up a significant amount of wealth." "I'm absolutely certain," she replied without hesitation. "No amount of money is worth my peace, or, more importantly, my children's peace. A legal battle would hurt them more than anything else, and I won't allow that. Joe stared at her, his mind reeling. The ambush theory crumbled before his eyes. This wasn't a strategy. It was a surrender. She wasn't just divorcing him. She was severing all material ties with surgical precision, as if erasing any trace of their shared past. Her demeanor wasn't that of a wounded woman, but of someone shedding a burden. And that realization hurt more than any fight over money. He who saw himself as the prize, the trophy, now understood that to Diana, he and everything tied to him had become something she needed to discard to move forward. The news of the settlement spread like wildfire. First to Emily, who upon hearing the terms from Joe felt a mix of relief and a strange nagging envy. Then to family and friends, and that's when the true power of Diana's actions began to show. Joe's parents, Robert and Margaret, a traditional couple with strict values, were furious with their son. To them, infidelity was a stain on the family's honor, and Joe's handling of it was shameful. During a heated phone call, Robert threatened to cut him off, disinherit him, remove him from the family business. It was Ethan, Diana's eldest, who, during a visit to his grandparents, mentioned with a teenager's blunt honesty that his mom was upset about their fight with his dad. 2 days later, to Robert and Margaret's astonishment, Diana showed up at their door. She wasn't there to complain about their son or seek comfort. She came to defend him. "I'm here to ask you not to do this," she said, sitting in the living room she'd visited for 20 years, now a stranger. "Joe wronged me, and that's between us. But he's your son, and above all, the father of my children. They need their dad, and they need their family whole. Punishing Joe is punishing Ethan and Sophie. Please forgive him." Margaret, her eyes teary, couldn't believe what she heard. "But dear, what he did," she began. "What he did is done," Diana interrupted gently. "Hatred won't fix anything. It'll only cause more pain, and I've decided I don't want more pain in my life or my kids' lives." Diana's maturity, her ability to put others' well-being above her own hurt, was a revelation. Robert, a stern, proud man, felt disarmed. That afternoon they didn't see their betrayed ex-daughter-in-law. They saw a woman of remarkable strength and integrity. Her words not only convinced them to forgive their son, but planted a seed of deep, lasting admiration for her. Meanwhile, Emily began to feel the ripple effects of Diana's nobility. At family gatherings, now filled with tense peace, Diana's name came up constantly. "Diana called to check on your uncle," a cousin said. "What an incredible woman, even after everything," an aunt remarked. Each praise for Diana was a veiled jab at her, the interloper. She, the new wife, the woman Joe left everything for, felt increasingly like a footnote in the family story. Diana's presence, even in her absence, was overwhelming. It was a ghost of perfection haunting Emily. Friends of the couple, who once treated her with cautious curiosity, now regarded her with polite coldness. They admired Diana's strength, her kindness, her refusal to play the victim. And by comparison, Emily felt smaller, more invisible. She was with Joe, lived with him, slept with him, but felt lonelier than ever. The victory she'd celebrated with wine and passion now tasted bitter, like being a secondary character in the life of the man she'd chosen. And the worst, she sensed, was yet to come. Diana's calm wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a new chapter, one where Emily began to realize that some battles aren't won by the enemy's surrender, but by their dignity. The months following the divorce were a slow poison for Emily. In the fertile ground of her insecurity, a desperate plan took root. She needed something undeniably hers, something to make her the center of Joe's universe, to tie her to that family in a way even Diana's memory couldn't erase. A child. A child would be her anchor, the living proof of her new place. It would be the joy to replace the admiration for the other, and secretly, it would ensure Joe would never leave her. Without a word to him, Emily stopped taking her birth control. Every night of love became a calculated act, a silent bet on her future. Months later, the bet paid off. The positive test was a shock to Joe, still adjusting to his new life. But the surprise soon turned to resigned acceptance. Then a spark of joy. A new life, a child, was an undeniable blessing, a light in the fog of complications his life had become. The news spread, and the family's reaction was cautious happiness. A baby was always welcome. When Diana learned through Sophie that Joe was having another child, she felt a pang in her chest, the last ghost of a life no longer hers. But true to her resolve, she turned pain into grace. Days later, a delivery arrived at Emily's door. The box, wrapped in white tissue paper with a silver satin ribbon, contained a beautiful baby layette, soft as a cloud. The items were classic, elegant, in impeccable taste. Attached was a small card in Diana's flawless handwriting. "Every child is a promise of happiness. May yours be immense. With care, Diana." The gesture, once again, placed her on a pedestal. Joe was touched, and for a moment felt a pang of longing he didn't dare admit. For Emily, the gift was like receiving a crown of thorns. It was beautiful, generous, and deeply humiliating. It was yet another proof of Diana's moral superiority. But now, pregnant, Emily felt stronger. She was the mother, the future. Emboldened by her new role, she decided to throw a baby shower. It would be her party, her celebration. She invited Joe's family, her own relatives, friends, and, in a bold move, perhaps an attempt to show she too could be magnanimous, she invited Diana. To her surprise, Diana accepted. The baby shower arrived, a sunny Sunday. The backyard of Robert and Margaret's house was decorated in soft pastels. Emily, radiant in a dress that highlighted her bump, was the center of attention. For the first time in a long while, she felt victorious. Diana arrived quietly, elegant in a navy linen dress, greeting everyone with a serene smile and handing over a package of diapers. She stayed discreet, chatting with her ex-in-laws who treated her with obvious affection. And then, fate, with its cruel sense of irony, moved its pieces. Emily's cousin Michael arrived late. He was an architect, a sharp and observant man who lived in Portland and wasn't fully aware of the messy family drama. He only knew his cousin was pregnant with her new husband. Seeing Diana near the dessert table, he was intrigued, not by her obvious beauty but by the calm aura she exuded, a point of stillness in the party's chaos. "You must be a friend of Emily's," he said, approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade and offering her one. Diana smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "In a complicated way, yes, I'm Diana." They started talking about architecture, books, the challenges of raising teenagers. There was no flirting, no ulterior motives, just an easy, unexpected connection, a fluid conversation between 2 adults feeling slightly out of place. Joe watched from afar, a strange sour feeling forming in his stomach. Emily, busy with gifts, barely noticed. That casual meeting was a seed. In the days that followed, Michael, in town for work, invited Diana for coffee to continue their talk about a project. Coffee turned into dinner the next week. Dinner became long walks in the park. Without forcing anything, without the pressure of romance, a sincere friendship bloomed, watered by mutual respect and a surprising affinity. Diana, who'd closed herself off to love, found in Michael a safe harbor, someone who saw her as Diana, not the ex-wife. When their relationship went public, it hit Emily's family like a bombshell. The ex, the woman who should have been licking her wounds, was now dating the beloved cousin, the pride of the family. And worse, Emily's family, her parents, aunts, cousins, who only knew Diana through her aura of dignity, instantly adored her. At subsequent family gatherings, the dynamic shifted devastatingly for Emily. If she'd felt like a shadow in Joe's family, now she felt like a stranger in her own. The praise once reserved for the perfect ex-daughter-in-law now came from her own mother. Michael's never seemed so happy. Diana's a gem. Her father, chatting with Joe, remarked, "You got lucky, man. Your ex is one of a kind." Emily watched, horrified, as Diana, with her quiet grace, won over her own family. She didn't need to fight or manipulate. She just existed, and her existence, now entwined with Emily's lineage, was the final proof of her defeat. She'd gotten pregnant to become the center, but the universe, capriciously, had chosen to revolve around Diana once more. The woman she'd tried to erase was now sitting at her dinner table, holding hands with her cousin. Loved by all. And Emily, with a baby on the way, had never felt so utterly alone. The irony was so cruel, so perfect, it seemed scripted by a vengeful god. And Diana's serenity, which once frightened her, now mocked her, a constant reminder that some victories are, in truth, the start of the bitterest losses. Pregnancy, meant to be her triumph, her crowning as the new matriarch, became a prison. Every pound gained, every limitation her body imposed, reminded her she was trapped, anchored, while Diana seemed to float, freer and lighter than ever. It was a cruel irony. She, Emily, the vibrant young woman representing the new, felt herself aging inside, while Diana, the wife left behind, seemed to blossom into a second youth. Every laugh from Diana, every gesture of intimacy with Michael, every whispered praise from an aunt was a knife twisting in her wound. "You don't see it," she'd say to Joe during long, tense nights, her belly heavy between them in bed. "She's doing this on purpose. She's flaunting her happiness in our faces." Joe, however, offered no comfort. Instead, he fueled the fire, consumed by a secret, bitter jealousy he didn't dare confess. He couldn't bear seeing Diana with another man, especially someone like Michael, successful, charming, visibly smitten. Diana's happiness didn't bring him peace, as he'd imagined. It brought a sharp sense of loss, the feeling he'd discarded something of immeasurable value. "That Michael guy doesn't seem like much," Joe grumbled, masking his resentment as criticism. "He's full of himself, arrogant. I don't know what Diana sees in him. She's probably just with him to get to me." Those words, instead of soothing Emily, deepened her torment. If Diana was doing this to hurt Joe, it meant their bond was still strong. It meant she, Emily, was just a pawn in their emotional game. Her insecurity turned to desperation, a paranoia that saw hidden motives in every gesture. The situation peaked when Diana and Michael took a trip to Europe. Social media, once a distraction, became Emily's torture device. She became obsessed, scrolling through photos endlessly. There was Diana, smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower, holding hands with Michael on a Venice gondola, toasting with wine in a Tuscan vineyard. She looked radiant, uninhibited, a woman rediscovering herself. Each photo was proof of the life Emily felt had been stolen from her, even though she was the winner. The man beside her, Joe, grew more distant. He came home late from work, sighed often, his eyes vacant. Their intimacy became rare and mechanical. She felt the pitying glances from others, the silent judgments of family and friends. Everyone seemed to know a secret she refused to admit. Her marriage, built on the ruins of another, had been born on rotten foundations. She tried to focus on her own life. She decorated the baby's room with near maniacal fervor, as if the wall colors could paint over her unhappiness. She bought expensive maternity clothes, trying to wear a joy she didn't feel. But it was futile. In the quiet of the night, with Joe sleeping restlessly beside her, she'd pick up her phone. And there was Diana's life, vibrant and real, mocking her grey existence. Desperation was a knot in her throat. She'd stolen Diana's husband, but Diana somehow had stolen her peace. Diana and Michael's return from Europe was celebrated with a dinner at Michael's parents' house, who, unaware of the undercurrents of resentment, simply wanted to gather loved ones. For Emily, the invitation was a summons to another night of torture. She spent the afternoon in front of the mirror battling her reflection. At 8 months pregnant, she felt like a heavy, rudderless ship. The swelling, the unexpected extra pounds, the constant exhaustion, all conspired to erode what remained of her self-esteem. Every dress she tried seemed to highlight what she hated most about herself. When Diana arrived, the contrast was devastating. She wore a burgundy dress, its fluid fabric hugging her curves with understated elegance. Her travel tan enhanced her glow, and there was a serenity in her smile that seemed to radiate from within. She wasn't just the dignified ex-wife anymore. She was a woman in her prime, vibrant and confident. Emily beside her felt faded, a pale, shapeless version of herself. She forced a smile, hid her discomfort, and spent the dinner pushing food around her plate, listening to travel stories and her family's effusive praise for the woman she envied. Joe, meanwhile, could barely take his eyes off Diana. He watched her laugh at Michael's jokes, the way his hand rested casually on her back, the intimacy in their glances. Each detail was a blow to his ego, visual confirmation of what he'd been denying. Her happiness was real, and it had nothing to do with him. Seeing her there, so stunning and so unattainable, stirred a flood of desire and regret, a painful nostalgia for the woman he only valued when he lost her for good. That night, in the heavy silence of the car ride home, something shifted in Joe. The cold distance that had settled between them in recent months seemed to vanish. As soon as they entered the bedroom, he pulled her close with an urgency she hadn't felt in ages. He kissed her with feverish passion, his hands roaming her body with a hunger that left her dizzy. For a moment, Emily let herself believe. Maybe the dinner had sparked jealousy in him. Maybe, seeing Diana with another, he'd finally realized it was her, Emily, he truly wanted. She gave herself to the moment, desperate for a shred of affection, proof she was loved. She felt desired, chosen, and a wave of relief and joy washed over her. This was the man she'd fought for, and he was finally there, present, passionate. But then, at the peak of intimacy, in her most vulnerable moment, he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with emotion. And the name he moaned wasn't hers. "Diana!" The word hung in the air, short, sharp, lethal. Emily's body froze instantly. The heat of the moment turned to an icy chill that ran down her spine and settled in her heart. She pushed him away, the shock so violent it left her breathless. He looked at her, his eyes still clouded with desire, taking a second to realize what he'd done. Then horror spread across his face. I didn't," he stammered, trying to recover, but it was too late. The truth, the terrible absolute truth she'd been trying to ignore, exploded within her with the force of a bomb. It wasn't jealousy he felt. It was desire. Desire for the other. He hadn't sought her out that night because he wanted her. He'd sought her because he couldn't have Diana. She was just a substitute, a vessel for the passion he felt for his ex-wife. "Get away from me!" she hissed, her voice trembling with cold fury. She stood, wrapping herself in the sheet like armor, and confronted him, tears of humiliation and rage streaming down her face. It was her, wasn't it? The whole time. You were with me, but thinking of her. Joe crumbled. The facade of the man in control, the pride, all fell apart. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, and began to sob. They were wrenching, broken sobs, the cry of a shattered man. And amid the tears came the confession, poured out like poison he could no longer hold in. "I can't take it anymore," he said, his voice muffled. "I can't stand seeing her happy with him. I thought I wanted freedom, thought I loved you. But when she let me go, when she didn't fight, something broke in me. I realized too late. I've always loved her, Em. I don't know what it is. I'm confused." And I realized it in the worst possible way, when it was already too late, when I'd already destroyed everything. Emily listened to each word like a verdict, the final sentence of her life. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Diana's calm wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Her generosity wasn't nobility, it was indifference. She wasn't playing a game, she'd simply left the board. And he, the man Emily had stolen, had never truly been hers. She was never the chosen one. She was just the mistake, the distraction, the stand-in. In that dark room, with Joe's sobs filling the silence, Emily felt the ground vanish beneath her. But what came next wasn't the abyss. It was a terrible, lucid clarity that hurt more than the betrayal itself. She looked at the man hunched on the bed, not with hatred, but with a cold epiphany. Joe wasn't just a man who loved another. He was something worse, a hollow man, a well of insecurity so deep he needed others' admiration and suffering to feel real. The truth hit her like lightning. Joe didn't love Diana. He loved the idea of Diana suffering for him. He'd expected her to beg, to fight, to make his departure the center of her universe. Her calm, her refusal to engage in the drama, didn't just disarm him, it emptied him. By moving on, Diana had taken away the mirror in which Joe saw his own reflection of importance. He didn't love her, he loved the power he thought he had over her. And now, seeing her happy with Michael, he felt the same desperate need to possess her, not out of love, but to reclaim his control. Emily realized, with nauseating clarity, that if the roles were reversed, if she left him and found happiness, He'd want her back with the same frantic intensity. He didn't love anyone. He just coveted what he couldn't have. In that moment, Diana's image transformed in her mind. She wasn't a saint or a master strategist. She was a survivor. Diana hadn't let him go out of cowardice or even dignity. She'd let him go because, after 20 years, she finally saw who he truly was. The betrayal wasn't the end of the marriage. It was the excuse she needed to escape an emotional prison. It wasn't a loss for Diana. It was liberation. And Emily, in her eagerness to win, had rushed to take her place in the cell. A flood of shameful memories hit her. She remembered the texts she sent to provoke him, the lies she told to pull him away from his family, the sadistic thrill she felt with every step that distanced him from Diana and brought him closer to her. She recalled how she'd planned every move to take Joe from his home and claim the role of wife. And now she tasted the bitter poison she'd helped brew. The world indeed turned. But what to do with this truth? The logical choice was to leave, to separate, to try to rebuild her life. But how? Return to her parents' house pregnant and defeated, to admit her monumental failure? And how to face her own family, now that Diana, the woman she'd destroyed, was the beloved girlfriend of her cousin? The humiliation would be unbearable, a public spectacle of her defeat. No, she wouldn't give them that satisfaction, so Emily made her choice. Not out of love or forgiveness, but out of pride and resignation. She didn't leave. Months later, their son was born, a beautiful, healthy boy. And that same night, back from the hospital, she packed her things and moved into the baby's room, which became both her refuge and her cell. The marriage, which had never truly existed, died officially there, though the certificate still bound them on paper. The years that followed were a long, monotonous purgatory. They lived under the same roof, two strangers sharing bills and a child. She knew Joe saw other women. He no longer bothered to hide it, and she no longer had the energy to care. His passion needed a stage, and as she refused to be his audience, he sought other spectacles. She lived for her son, a pure, real love that was her only lifeline in an ocean of regret. But even there, Diana's shadow reached her. At her son's birthdays, there was Diana, the honorary aunt, always elegant, always serene, a living, constant reminder of everything Emily had lost by thinking she'd won. She felt the crushing weight of irony. She lived 6 years in the shadow of a woman who, even betrayed, never needed to fight for respect, because her dignity spoke for itself. And it was there, in the silent nights after her son slept and the house was filled with the emptiness of her life, that Emily began to write. At first it was just a journal, a way to keep from going mad, but slowly the words took shape, weaving the tapestry of her choices, her envy, her fall. She wrote about Diana's terrifying calm, Joe's fragility, the cruelty of fate. And in writing she found an unexpected purpose. This story, the one you've just read, is her confession. It's her way of being heard, of giving meaning to her pain. She shares it anonymously, not seeking pity but as a warning. A bottle tossed into the sea of the internet, carrying a message for other women who, like she once was, might be tempted to build their happiness on another's sorrow. It's her penance and her only path to redemption, to tell the world that a throne won through deceit is, in truth, a guillotine, and that sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to walk away, and the worst defeat is getting exactly what you fought for. This was the story of Emily, Joe, and Diana, a journey of choices, consequences, and the ironic twists life can bring. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect, it can touch the hearts of others too. Help spread this powerful message. Share this video with your friends and family group. A story like this can serve as an important warning about how our decisions can shape our destiny in unexpected ways. Leave your like so the algorithm can show this story to more people who need to hear it. And of course, if you enjoy thrilling narratives full of twists, subscribe to the channel to not miss any of our upcoming videos. Your participation is essential for us to keep going. Thank you so much, and until next time,